Further explore the complex subject matter that significantly affects the well-being of our loved ones. I'd also like to thank today's panelists for sharing their time with us today. Please join me in welcoming Renato Zane, Foundation board member, who will be today's moderator. Thank you.
让你不痛打一个针。Anesthesia.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thank you, Cannabis. And I'm very happy to be moderating the discussion today. It's going to be a very interesting one for all of us. And this microphone's falling. So can you hear me? Okay. Before we start, I also would like to thank a very important partner of today, and that's the Otsuka Lundberg Alliance for their sponsorship of this event. It's very important to have organizations that put money towards these kinds of things, and we really appreciate it. So we're very fortunate today to have an excellent panel who have generously volunteered their time, as Dave mentioned. Before I introduce them, I'd just like to make a couple of housekeeping notes. Just a reminder that the bathrooms are down the hall in the back here, and up the stairway over there if you need to. Also, we are streaming the panel discussion online. And I'd like to welcome everyone who's joining us from other parts of the province. We can't see you, but we're very happy that you're here. We are going to have some questions and answers up here for a short period of time, and then we're going to be opening up questions from the floor and from people online. So please, if you have questions, write them down on cue cards on your table and then hold them up for our runners to collect. Just wanted to check, who are the runners? Ben in the back, and then we have other runners over here, which is fantastic, thank you. Also, for those of you watching remotely, you can submit your questions through the webinar and they'll be added to the queue. If you have any trouble, please send an email in if you're having trouble to submitting your questions through the webinar. The email address is communications@bcss.org. That's communications@bcss.org. And after the panel discussion, there will be a reception, so we hope that you'll join us to mingle and talk a little bit about some of the things that we've learned today. So, over the years, many people have debated the relationship between marijuana use and schizophrenia. Research has been conducted on the possible causal relationship between cannabis and psychosis, and most of the results have been quite nuanced, creating significant controversy. Today, with the help from our panelists, we will endeavor to clarify and answer some questions we all may have when it comes to the relationship between cannabis and mental health, including psychosis, and the future of cannabis use in British Columbia and in Canada. So let's welcome our panelists. To my immediate right, Dr. William Honer is the head of the UBC Department of Psychiatry. He is also the director of the UBC Institute of Mental Health. He is also well known to BCSS and the Foundation as the holder of the Jack Bell Chair in Schizophrenia, conducting leading-edge research. Next to him, we have Dr. Diane McIntosh, who is the clinical assistant professor at the UBC Department of Psychiatry, with a special interest in the neurobiology of mood and anxiety disorders. And then we have Dr. Aster Barr, who is the associate professor at the UBC Department of Anesthesiology, Pharmacology, and Therapeutics, who is researching the links between cannabis and psychosis currently, and is very involved with Dr. Honer on the special project they're doing in the downtown east side. So, to get things started, we'd like to ask each of the panelists to give us a couple of opening thoughts, no more than a couple of minutes each, please. Opening thoughts on the topic of today, which is cannabis and mental health, based on your experience and any other general remarks that you'd like to make about your area of study. So why don't we start with Dr. Honer?
Thanks very much. It's great to be here and to be able to participate in the panel. I guess in reflecting on this a bit before coming, I think a lot of the challenges come up in terms of, as our moderator alluded to, looking for simple answers to things, what cause and effect sort of things in terms of understanding about schizophrenia, what the risks are, and those sort of things for all of our family members who have the illness and so on. And unfortunately, it isn't simple, as he alluded to, and trying to understand the difference between the cause and the risk are different sort of things. Perhaps we'll get into that a bit in the discussion, because I think when we think in the broader sense at what the implications of the upcoming legalization and so on are, we have to keep that in mind, just what is the difference between a risk and a cause. And I think, too, it's really important to understand that the vast amount of research that we have is largely looking at groups, and everybody wants to take it down to my family member, my individual person, what does it mean for them, sort of thing. And that's very, very difficult, very challenging to do. So I think maybe those are some things we'll get into in the discussion, trying to understand just what are the implications and so on at a bigger level, nationally kind of for us in Canada, because we are leading in this way. And whether there's any conclusions we can yet draw for the individual patients that we're looking after or the members of our families who have illness.
Diane?
Hi, everybody. It's lovely to be here on this beautiful sunny day. I'm glad I'm in air-conditioned comfort up here. What am I going to say as a startup? First of all, I wanted to say that I was glad that your acceptance of pharma funding for a meeting like this, because I realize that pharma companies have not behaved very well in the past at all, and they really have changed their behavior a great deal. And why I'm saying this is because we really don't know what causes these illnesses. We're still out in the leaves here. We're not down in the roots yet, both for what the causes and also our treatments. And in order to get new treatments, we need to have pharma involved. And so I do appreciate the fact that there are challenges with that, not everybody agrees. I think that we don't know the causes of schizophrenia. I believe chronic depression and anxiety are inflammatory illnesses. I think we need new and innovative treatments. But to Bill's point, we don't have any clear links. If you do this, you will get schizophrenia. We're not there yet. So I think we need to encourage a broader view of, I have very strong feelings about cannabis in the developing brain, and that's really where my focus is. But I think that until we understand schizophrenia more broadly, we're never really going to get down into the roots and understand how to treat it and what we have to be careful with.
Dr. Asghar?
I can really top that. But what I will say is that I think today we're probably going to talk quite a lot about some of the harms associated with cannabis use. And there are certainly many of those up teeth over there. So I think it's also important to know that in the last few years that there is some evidence that there may be some parts of cannabis that may have some therapeutic potential. So I do hope that we will get a chance to discuss that today.
Excellent. I actually do have a couple of questions later on that topic, but can we just start by discussing Canada's future first? And that is specifically something that Diane was looking into, which is, the Canadian Psychiatric Association says that Canadian youth are the top users of cannabis in the developed world. There's a lot of talk around the idea of how youth are more susceptible to the effects of cannabis because their brains are still developing, as you mentioned. So, Dan, would you mind starting us off on this topic, and then maybe I'll turn to Dr. Homer and Dr. Barr for some more reflection.
Sure. So we tend to think, when babies are born, that their brains are very plastic, and absolutely they are. Our brains are plastic all through our lives. Peaks around 35 and goes downhill afterwards, like most things, but it does. This is why when you're 70 and 80, you can continue to learn new things. Some of the most critical times in our development are during those teen years, when you're creating these circuits, these connections between key brain areas. So if you go to big schizophrenia meetings now, you'll hear schizophrenia being called a circuitopathy. There's a damage to those connections or those circuits. If you think about all of our most serious mental illnesses like schizophrenia, bipolar, OCD, all of these are circuitopathies. And when do they begin? In the teen years. This is when those critical connections are formed. And it's my belief that, well, we also know one of those most critical parts of your brain. Does anyone have a teenager? I have two. Well, my 20-year-old is more like a teenager. Do they have a functional prefrontal cortex? No. Okay, so that part of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, the executive of your brain, organizing, planning, forward thinking, critical thinking. It's not fully formed until you're 25. So that development goes on, and that's why recently the Canadian Medical Association came out and said we shouldn't allow kids to use pot till they're 25. I mean, that's not going to happen. But that's why, is because those critical circuits are still forming. Your important ability to function as an adult in the adult world is not fully formed on average till you're 25. So that's my understanding of the underlying reason why we're so concerned about developing brains.
Yeah, I guess just expand and modify a little bit some things Dr. McIntosh talked about. I mean, I think there's two ways to think of the early age up until middle age, I guess, aspects of what she's talking about. First, I think of brain development as something that starts in utero during pregnancy, when the fetus is in utero, and the development goes to about age 2 or 3 years old. Because the things that are being added to the brain, the cells forming and what's happening is really something quite different than what happens after 2 years old. And you just reflect on your own experience with young kids and so on. Once they can walk and talk and so on, it's a different ballgame than up until then. So the development part is relevant to schizophrenia. We do have to think about that in terms of the risks that may be occurring for the fetus as it's growing, and in terms of very young children, in terms of the risks that can happen to their brain development. But Dr. McIntosh is absolutely right that there's what I would call a maturation then of the brain after age 2. And I think that maturation process, some of the things she's talked about, like the connections between different parts of the brain and how we learn, how our memories are formed, those go on probably, even I would think maybe even into the 40s in terms of a pathway that this is maturing and so on. And then, really what happens as we age and so on, what can happen as we age, is that some of that maturation begins to deteriorate, to be frank. Elderly patients with Alzheimer's and so on, they've lost some of that maturation, if you will. They've lost some of those connections, some of that flexibility that they've got. So that maturation phase, and there are definitely, you can just think about development of children, that period after they're going to walk and talk and those sort of things up until their adolescence, and then the teenage and youth years are different. But as are the early adult years and until we're even probably in our 40s or so on, they're all different things and maybe different levels of risk. Depending on what that brain is exposed to during those times. Positive things, growing up in a nurturing family, being educated, those are all positive kind of things that help that maturing of the brain, which, as we know, schizophrenia can rob the ability of young people to have those experiences that are very, very positive. But there are risks too, that negative things that the brain can be exposed to during that maturing period of time. Tobacco, alcohol, cannabis, those are all risks that can impair in some ways that maturing process and perhaps lead to changes that exacerbate or make worse the psychotic process. So those are just kind of things to think about. And we do always focus on the early stage of schizophrenia in our young people who have it, but we have to think too about older people who have schizophrenia and what is their outcome and how can we make sure that they have as rich a life as elders as possible too. So thinking about that development, maturing, and preventing the deterioration is really where we want to go from a science point of view. And how cannabis might play some roles in that is, for the positive and the negative, is really important to talk about.
Is there anything to add?
Sure. So I think one of the problems of trying to figure out whether cannabis does or does not cause psychosis is that people will often start using cannabis well before schizophrenia would naturally happen. So people start using cannabis in their early teens, and schizophrenia might start to develop much later on. So teasing out whether one causes the other not is a challenge. So in another life ago, I used to be a basic scientist doing work with animals, and there's certainly been some research to try and address this issue, because you can directly give THC, for example, the main active psychoactive component of cannabis, to animals and see what happens. So, for example, we have a world-leading researcher, Stephen Paulette, who's at the University of Western Ontario. So what he does is he gives THC to animals at different stages of development. And he finds that if you give THC to rats in adulthood, no lasting problems at all. But if you give it to them during their mid-adolescence, you do see these adult onset behavioral deficits, many of which are relevant to schizophrenia. So we talk about things like sensory motor gating deficits, ability to process information correctly, and it does seem to be impaired in a sensitive manner when these animals are administered THC. The other thing too I come back to that Bill's talking about is in utero exposure. There's a well-known researcher, you hasn't heard, down in the US, who's actually studied this. So she studied women who aborted mid-term, who used cannabis. And she looked at the developing brain of these individuals and found some quite striking changes in the dopamine system. So, as more and more people start to perhaps smoke in the next few years, and we all know that sometimes you don't know when you're pregnant, it's an issue.
And feel free to jump in and interrupt each other if you don't always have to go in order. I'm just going to jump on that topic because Dean, who's been helping us do some research, found that in a study in the Schizophrenia Bulletin in December 2013, indicated that it's not how early a person first uses cannabis that affects the potential development of psychosis, but possibly a combination of frequency, potency, and duration. So those who started using cannabis under 15 seem to have that early onset of psychosis but it was more marked apparently in people who were using cannabis daily. So this whole question of how much THC, how potent is the cannabis, how often, it seems to create a lot of challenging variables for you as scientists and for us as society. Is that correct? What are your thoughts on all these variables? Where do we begin to understand how to protect our youth when it comes to cannabis? Maybe jump in. Anybody wants to start with that?
My reading of the data is that young males, and you're right, by 15, high potency, frequent use seems to be the group that has the highest risk. The association that I think is most clear, and there are some researchers who are very confidently saying cannabis, THC, is a neurotoxin, it causes brain injury and causes schizophrenia. I don't think we're there yet. What we can say is that there appears to be a link, and the one that seems most clear to me is the early onset of schizophrenia by, on average, about 6 years earlier. Now, I was giving a public lecture recently, or a few months ago, and there were members or individuals there who owned a cannabis store, obviously, and I realized that you're never going to bring the pot zealots on your side. Their beliefs are their beliefs, and they're not changing them. But one of them said, if you're going to get schizophrenia, you're going to get schizophrenia. What does it matter 5 years, 6 years? We all know that 6 years matters a lot, right? Girls tend to have the onset of schizophrenia later, so they have more education, more social connectedness, less likely to live in poverty. So those 6 years to me are powerful, and they seem to be correlated, and these gentlemen can certainly jump in, related to young use, high potency, and highly frequent use of cannabis.
I think just so people are not sure just totally at the level of knowledge or so, so we're talking about a plant, and that plant is taken in different ways by people. They can smoke it, they can eat it, and like anything, the parts of it that get absorbed into your system might be different depending on how you use it, depending on where it came from, what variety of the plant it is, and so on, right? And then in that stuff that people are taking, there's a wide range of things that can affect our brains. The ones with long names, and so one of them is called THC. That's the one Dr. Barr mentioned, and so on, which tends to be the stimulant, euphoria, maybe relates to psychosis kind of part of the plant. And it's just a chemical that's in the plant. And then there's another one, whose short name is CBD, that seems to be the one that sort of makes people sleepy, maybe makes them hungry, can be, kind of calming in some ways for some people. And the different cannabis strains will have more of one than the other, and that's only two. I don't know how else you can say. There's probably hundreds, at least, of different things that are active in these plants. So you can see why our research has been very difficult, because that's what we're studying with a plant that's got lots of these active components to it and so on. You have to also understand that getting access to this stuff to study for the last centuries or so has been illegal, right? You're trying to study an illegal plant. You can't order it, you can't buy it. It's just very, very difficult. And so that's, I mean, if you want to put a more positive spin on the legalization, and we hope the access that researchers will have to really be able to do much better studies of what is good or what is problematic, to give better advice than we can give now in terms of what strains of the plant are particularly should not be used, particularly by people with schizophrenia perhaps, what strains maybe might have some benefits. We know, for example, there is a preparation that's made from cannabis that a drug company makes called Sativex, which is, it's an extract of the plant, right? They use alcohols and they extract these active chemicals out of it. This medication is half of the THC and half of the CBD. That's the balance that it's got, okay? And they use this medication, it's approved in Canada, for the treatment of pain in patients who have multiple sclerosis. Now, for example, they don't seem to get psychotic. These are people with compromised brains. Multiple sclerosis is a definite brain disease. They don't seem to get psychotic on this balance of things, so. But what does that have to do with smoking cannabis? Well, it's a tenuous connection. We really don't know, and just how helpful it is, we're not so sure either. So I think that there's reason to think that when we understand more of the complexity of the plant, maybe there are things that we can pull out of the plant that will be positive without having the negative aspects. And there are ways that we can say, when we understand that this strain, this group of strains and so on should be avoided by people who have anxiety disorders, who have depression, who have schizophrenia, because they have too much of these components that are harmful for those people. So I think there's reason to be optimistic as this landscape shifts in terms of what we can do as researchers, the involvement, in the private sector and developing some of these things, different types of cannabis or different extracts of cannabis that could be useful for us. It's a reason to think, it's not the end of the world here, this legalization. There could be positive things that will happen for all of us in the future as this rolls out.
Yeah, and Alistair was telling me that he's been doing some research into some of the other properties of cannabis.
Can I ask a question before, because I want to hear your answer to
Sure.
something that Bill brought up, which I think is important, because you're talking, I think, a more nuanced argument or discussion around, what good can come out of cannabis as a natural product that can become all kinds of things. But I think my concern around psychosis is related to the fact that it's primarily what my kid can get on a schoolyard is primarily THC. Most of the CBD has been bred out of it. We've got organized crime generally wants repeat customers, so the potency of THC has heightened significantly. It's not your parents' pot anymore. It was 154%, now it's 20%, maybe higher, is my understanding, my reading of what's happening, and why I'm so concerned is because we're having unfettered access to high THC in these schoolyards for kids, so that, I would say 4 of my son's friends who high school, he's 20 now, are stoners. That's all they do, is smoke pot, and all 4 of them are mentally ill, and that started the minute they started in grade 8. So while there's good things potentially to come, my concern is what we're dealing with now, and I wonder if you could address whether what I'm saying makes any sense.
Sure. So, they say that the THC content in the 1960s was around 3%. On average now, in Western Europe and North America, it's around 15%, so it's quite a lot. At the same time, too, some strains do have pure THC with very little cannabidiol in it. So that would be pro-psychotic inducing in theory. That being said, it's important to differentiate where these drugs come from. Most of the dispensaries in Vancouver do not get their drugs, their cannabis from a licensed producer, which are the government authorized companies that are actually allowed to create the stuff, the medical marijuana. So most of it, and in full disclosure, I am in the process of working with a number of these licensed producers. but most of them do produce balanced strains that have equal concentrations of cannabidiol and THC. Most of the ones that are providing dispensaries illegally with cannabis are not bound by any need to follow those kind of rules. So, in answer to your question about
Can I be clear? I'm not sure. You're saying some offer a balanced CBD, THC, but some don't? Is that
some licensed producers do offer a balanced CBD, THC.
That's what I understand, but not everyone.
Not everyone does. But in answer to the original question, like, what is it about cannabis that seems to cause psychosis? I'd probably refer to the London group led by Robin Murray, some of you may have heard of. What he's found is that it's people who use a high THC, low cannabidiol version of cannabis called skunk, they refer to it as. It seems to be the thing that pushes people into becoming psychotic. They're 5 times more likely to become psychotic if they smoke skunk. Whereas they find that people who use hash do not develop psychosis. Hash is a low potency THC compound and also has a high ratio of cannabidiol as well. So even people using hash do not develop psychosis because the high THC only in agreement with what both of you are saying.
Yeah, I think it's important also to just for people. That's based on the Institute of Psychiatry London data and London England data, and we really don't know what is in the stuff that we have here. Whether how comparable it is or whatnot. I mean, I think the assays, the measurements of these compounds that have been done, a lot of it's been done in the forensic side by the RCMP or the police agencies and so on. There's differences in terms of what part of the plant you take your sample out of and so on. So again, just the difficulty we've had doing research on an illegal drug, and it's still illegal, so I guess next June or something. It's created a lot of problems, so we can be very careful about generalizing from a study done in one place with one description of what hash is or skunk is or whatever to our local environment and so on. And I just don't know how much we know about it could be worse here for all we know in terms of.
Well, we certainly have people know how to extract THC from the plant to make it even more concentrated. People did things like shatter and so on. It's very high concentration, and that really hasn't been studied at all, I'd say.
So we're definitely going down the road towards talking about regulation and what's going to happen in the next year. But before we do that, I think there's some questions that family members will have about schizophrenia. So if you wouldn't mind, we'll get to that, the whole regulation issue in a minute. But what are your thoughts on people who use medical marijuana to relieve pain? Should they be concerned that cannabis use is going to create some additional issues for them? And we're talking about people who are not teenagers, obviously. Would you recommend that they not use cannabis for pain relief if they have other mental illnesses? Anybody?
I think there are a couple of areas where the use of cannabis and cannabis as a balance of THC and CBD have shown that they really do have value.
I mean, you have to understand that when a new drug is in research, there's extensive studies. So the company will create a drug for a particular illness or something. And in the studies, they have to show that it benefits that illness, and they record all the side effects that the drug has. And then we learn the drug is approved. Doctors will report any adverse events that happen after a drug's approved, because it could potentially start to get used for things that it wasn't originally made for. Or somebody who has two illnesses, who has arthritis and heart disease. They've got a drug for their arthritis and it makes their heart disease worse. So we'll understand those things in drugs that go through the usual process of approval, of regulation, and are prescribable drugs. And so doctors are comfortable with that. We understand those drugs. We understand the risks that might happen with them and so on. Cannabis, medical marijuana, didn't have any of that process. Okay, there was nothing in terms of clinical trials and understanding side effects. If you're taking it for pain, will you have the side effect of psychosis?
Aside from, the Zativex, which I've looked up to see, because that one has been studied. But again, that's a preparation. That's not street cannabis or so on. So medical marijuana, to me, we just don't know nearly as much, and there's, I think, a lot less comfort that physicians have in prescribing medical marijuana for that reason. It's very different than prescribing a drug that's gone through the approval process, that's regulated, and we understand so much better.
Just an example, I worked as a civilian for CFP Halifax, so for the Canadian Forces for 3 years, and I worked in a PTSD clinic. And if you recently heard that the Veterans Affairs Canada had pulled back the amount that they were allowing to be covered by Veterans Affairs of cannabis for PTSD, patients who had PTSD, because the average use, what they were paying out daily, 10 grams. So this is what my concern is, that we're the same way that using lorazepam or clonazepam, people are concerned about those medications because of escalating use, because you're not treating the underlying problem. This is what's happening with PTSD patients who are very challenging to treat. They start smoking pot and they need more and more and more to get the same effect. So that's a real life example of what happens with unfettered use of a drug that really doesn't change the underlying problem. It doesn't treat the inside, it's a Band-Aid, and the Band-Aid's got to get bigger and bigger to cover the problem all the time.
I was going to ask you about the downtown east side, your project there.
I would say, that's what Diane's saying too, is pain in particular seems to be the one area that I'd say the most research is happening right now with cannabis. There are some good people working on it. I agree there needs to be much more scientific rigor. But that's starting to happen right now. I think within a year or two, there'll be quite a number of clinical trials whose results that have been reported. What they're going to find, I'm not sure, but it certainly seems to be the biggest area of research right now is pain.
And what is your research in the downtown east side showing at this point? Can you draw any conclusions from the projects with people there?
Well, I'll start, and Alistair can chip in because he's done a lot of really important work too. So what our study in downtown east side is looking at people who live in the hotels in the downtown east side who volunteer to participate in the study. We'll follow about 450 people now who joined the study. Just, they live there. That's the reason they're in the study. It's not because they have any particular problems or anything like that they were selected to join. So in following those people and learning about them and so on, about 20% probably have schizophrenia or related disorder, which is 1 in 5. So that's very much higher than the average in BC or so on. And what we find is that there is definitely a little bit more of severity of psychosis in those who use cannabis compared with those who don't. Even in that population where most, more commonly it's crack cocaine that people use and other stimulant drugs and so on. So I was, skeptical at first, but we do see a little bit of increase, it seems, in the effect, in their severity of psychotic symptoms related to cannabis. So I can't, this is not like a rigorous study where we compare cannabis to, a placebo cannabis or something like that, right? Those are much more definitive studies, which will come in terms of what Alistair's talking about when the companies are more involved and want to test their products and so on for prevention psychosis. We'll see if it causes an increase in severity. But by looking overall in this group of participants, we do see some increase in the severity, I think, related to the cannabis.
Yeah, no, we published an interesting paper last year showing exactly that. So we looked at people who were using psychostimulant drugs. So these are mainly cocaine, methamphetamine. These are drugs that have a tremendous effect on the dopamine system in your brain, increasing your dopamine levels hundreds of %. And what we found is that people who took these drugs are clearly psychotic. But as Bill said, if you add cannabis to that, you do see a further increase. And it's interesting because one wonders whether or not it suggests that there may be multiple pathways to psychosis. It's just very preliminary, but it's an interesting finding.
Okay. I see the questions are starting to come in, so maybe we'll just talk a little bit about legislation first, and then we'll start asking some questions from the floor and from our people across the province. So the obvious question that I have is legalization a good idea? What do you think? Who wants to go first? I mean, we're going to be facing this as next year?
The horse is out of the barn. Really, I mean, like I said, it's easier to get cannabis than it is to get alcohol. It is viewed as really in British Columbia like a oregano. It's a spice, add spice to life. It's safe. This is how it's viewed. So I think to make an opportunity out of this, increasing research, increasing access to the drug to be able to do research, but also trying to educate family practitioners, our colleagues in general, around the risks, the potential risks of this drug. Because to me, anyone who's in my office has a vulnerable brain. Thus, their children have a vulnerable brain. So I talk to every single person that is in my office about their kids. Start talking to them early, have these conversations, prepare them. I'm okay with scaring them. So long, because I believe so strongly in the risk associated with what they're doing on the schoolyard. But I think one of the opportunities we have here is education, so long as that's what happens and the federal government actually steps up to the plate, provides the money and the resources to be able to do that.
I think it's coming. I just think it has to be well regulated. I think that people have to know what product they're getting and what's in that product, and to know that that product's safe. It hasn't been sprayed with all kinds of toxic pesticides and herbicides and so on. THC content is known, cannabinoid content is known. I think that's the key thing.
So, because a related question I had was, what are your thoughts on cannabis clubs, medicinal cannabis, and generally the way that people obtain cannabis today? Is it a Wild West? If you had someone close to you who was a regular user, what would you recommend they do?
As I was driving here, so I was listening to CBC Radio, and there was a woman on talking about cannabis. She was a cannabis sommelier. So this is where we're headed, where she's helping you to choose the right pot for your evening event and what will mix with best and that sort of thing. So this is where we're moving. Unfortunately, to Alistair's point, I don't think that people have that kind of information, access to that information. It's going to take a long time before teenagers are going and picking the right one for them. What's available now is not, I don't think, and I think that's a while off before that actually happens.
And how active is the government and Ottawa politicians in general been in talking to the scientific community? Have you had any contact? And how, you're shaking your head, so how confident are you that this legislation is going to be okay? Any confidence? Real concern? How would you rate it?
Well, I mean, is the status quo okay? Is it okay that it's easier to get cannabis than alcohol for teenagers and school kids and so on? Is that okay? No, it's not okay. I mean, is it going to get worse when we have, however they decide to distribute cannabis and so on? I don't know. That's the risk that it could get worse and get easier access. I don't know. Maybe, hopefully, there'll be less access for those who are underage and can't get it. There is something in the use of the word spice here. Something else I want to mention, though. Aside from the plant, there is other kinds of cannabinoids, the chemicals that are in the plant. They do make these synthetically, and they're sold on the internet actually as something that is called a spice. But it's not particularly widely used, to my knowledge, in British Columbia. But it is, talking to colleagues in the eastern part of the U.S. certainly, and in the UK, this is increasingly used. So what they do is they'll sell, sort of herbs like, I don't know, oregano or something like that, and they squirt some of this synthetic drugs on it that are active on the parts of our brain that are sensitive to cannabinoids. And these I have great concern about. They're certainly much more likely to be extremely high potent and toxic, frankly. So, if by regulating the plant and getting that, some control of that market and so on, and hopefully we'll push out the illegal use of the plant and whatnot so that we'll have it regulated. And maybe help prevent this synthetic cannabinoids from entering our market and being used. Those would all be very positive outcomes if indeed they come to pass, and I hope they do.
Okay. So for the record, it's important for me to let you know that the BCSS has aligned with the Canadian Psychiatric Association position that they have put forward for this legislation. And basically, the concern from BCSS and from the Psychiatric Association is that the recommendation around additional restrictions for use of cannabis by minors. So the recommendation is basically that no one under the age of 21 should have access to cannabis, and restricting the quantity and THC potency of cannabis for those between 21 and 25. Is that a good idea based on what we heard about earlier? What do you think of that?
I don't think it's going to happen. I think when you go from grade 7 to grade 8, everyone has access to cannabis, and saying, well, you can't have till you're 21, it's just not going to happen. And what I think it's going to continue to drive the whole organized crime. This is a very, very complicated issue. I think that Canada is going to have to grapple with is how do you get the right pricing? How do you distribute it? How do you keep the supply safe? It has to be the right price in order to drive out organized crime, right? We know that we've learned that from cigarettes. So I think it's a very challenging situation, and I agree. Like my kids, I don't want them to use pot ever, or until they're 25. But the reality is that every kid that I know, my kids excluded, because I frightened them to death. Every kid I know was smoking pot. So saying you can't have it until you're 21 or 25, that's ridiculous. It's just not going to happen. I don't. Alex?
My kids are like 8, 3 and 3 months, so I've got time. But yeah,
well, scary. Let's hope that there's a lot of citizen interest in the drafting of the legislation, that there will be an open process, and perhaps scientists like yourselves will have a chance to say things that are on your mind.
The government did actually allocate about $1 million recently. They recognised that what was coming was a unique event, so they set aside about $100,000 grants, which probably sounds like a lot, but honestly it's not. And so they want people to try and get some kind of baseline measure before things change, and then see how things change over time. But I wouldn't call that a serious commitment by the government to look at this.
So is there a timeline to address it? Are they trying to push this through for political reasons? What are your personal opinions about that? It sounds like it to me. It sounds like they're trying to get things done before Canada Day of next year. But it may not be the best thing for
you might want to ask them, speak to the licensed producers, see how they're handling some of it. I know that there is quite a big lag time between when you decide that you want to expand your production to actually having the RCMP come by, authorize it, get signed off, and actually have that the license to actually grow in that particular environment. It does take time.
So, while we've been talking, a lot of people have been sending in questions. So I have a lot of questions from the floor and from other parts of the province. Hopefully we'll get to all of them. And they've been sort of ordered and ranked by our staff here. So the first question is from Sonia, and she asks, how is it that cannabis is still classified as non-addictive? Isn't it true that marijuana can rewire the brain? Non-addictive?
Well, I think, so the American Psychiatric Association puts out this book called the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for disorders, and it's what we call now substance use disorders. There's a lot of language around this. We don't use the term addiction anymore. In DSM, it's not even dependence or abuse, it's just use disorders now. So this is just the language and jargon that has changed around a lot. So in the old days, addiction was a pattern of drug use that was, the person could not stop themselves from using the drug. They had to use more and more of the drug to get the same effect. The drug was having very adverse effects on their families and their environment and so on. They stopped using the drug, they had withdrawal symptoms there are drugs like that. Tobacco is very addictive in that way. We all know alcoholism is very bad. Alcoholism, seizures, you die. So those are very addictive kinds of drugs. It is harder, with that old terminology, to define cannabis in that sort of a way to have those same kind of very powerful properties like those other two drugs, which the heroin does and so on. So I think it's partly just shifting the language and what we talk about in terms of how we classify drugs and how we classify how we respond to drugs. It's also the drug harm literature. People talk about harms to drugs, they talk about harms to individual people, they talk about harms.
And the drug that causes the most harm is alcohol. Right? People die from alcohol. They get into car accidents and they die when you're drunk. It's to society, it's very harmful. And obviously, that's the ultimate harm for an individual person. Tobacco is a very harmful drug as well. It likely causes lung cancer. We're understanding that causal link much more strongly. So this in terms of, and the legislators, they think about all these kind of things too when they're faced with a new drug and so on, from all these very broad perspectives, which are very different. And again, what I said at the very beginning, it's very different when we're thinking about our individual family member or so. Again, it's just different perspectives that put to this by people with different responsibilities.
Although you bring up a number of points that I think are used by what I would call the pot zealots, who feel very strongly that cannabis should be unregulated, everyone should be able to access it. Things like you're a safer driver when you're high, right? Like people believe this in their soul. You know why? Because you drive more slowly. That is the belief. So to me, and we know what's happened, the pot zealots will say there's been no change in the number of people who die from car accidents in areas where they've legalized cannabis. That's not true. In fact, there have been increases, and particularly in the deaths of young people. So you are not safe behind the wheel. So I don't actually get the whole thing about let's compare it to alcohol. It's like saying, well, heroin is worse than cocaine, so let's all use cocaine. They both have problems, right? Alcohol has issues, and it's probably the most likely to kill you of any of the substances we have. But cannabis comes with risks too. You get lung cancer from smoking pot. You get a terrible inhibitional syndrome with risk for some people associated with pot. You can get schizophrenia, which logs years off your life associated with pot, and you can be a dangerous driver associated with pot. So I think, what would you rather have your kids? Neither one. They both come with risks, and I don't agree with saying, well, cannabis at least is better than. It comes with its own set of risks.
So here's another question, also from Sonia. There's a stabilizer in weed that prevents you from going psychotic and the psychotic effects of THC. Why are we not using and studying this chemical to create a medicine to prevent and treat psychosis? Anybody want to take that?
Sure. So I think, I don't know what Sonia is. I think that she's probably referring to cannabidiol, CBD. So this is one of the compounds that one of the 100 or more cannabinoids that we find in cannabis. And it's certainly there's a bit of evidence now that having high levels of cannabidiol in the cannabis will decrease the psychotogenic effects of the cannabis itself. But even beyond that, there have been a number of studies right now that have actually looked at pure cannabidiol for the treatment of psychosis and schizophrenia. I've got a paper right here from Germany back in 2012, where they treated adults who had an acute exacerbation of psychosis in a ward, and they compared cannabidiol, a very high dose of about 800 milligrams a day, to amisulpride, which is a fairly well-respected antipsychotic drug. And in terms of reducing psychosis, they were both almost equally as effective over a 4-week period. The difference being that there were far fewer side effects associated with cannabidiol treatment than there were with amisulpride. So it's just one published study, but I am aware of several more that are happening. There's a study happening in London right now with GW Pharma, who's the company that produces Sativex. There have been some studies happening in Brazil. So it is intriguing, and there's definitely a very fascinating possibility that there may be a new way of treating psychosis. with cannabidiol?
But the reason is because it's been illegal to get it. I mean, to get the cannabis, to extract the CBD out, to then do the study, Big Pharma, they don't want to say anything to do with that because it's been illegal to do it. There've been very high hurdles to do any of that kind of work. So it's been small studies in Germany and Brazil where, I don't know, where the regulatory framework may be different in terms of synthesizing this or so on. These are also, correct me if I'm wrong, Alistair, but fairly kind of big molecules. They're not easy to make or so on, and so it's not trivial to do the kind of studies. And again, I hope with the change in the regulatory environment, we will be able to understand the risks and the potential benefits better.
In the U.S., cannabis is at the same level as heroin as far as it's a Schedule 1, I think what it's called. Drug. So this is why it has. I mean, we have in the U.S. where a huge amount of money, a huge amount of research available, opportunities available, but it was very difficult to do with a Schedule 1 drug.
Right. Because Jamie is also asking a related question, which is, is it possible to find strains of cannabis with no THC, and would that reduce psychotic episodes? I think we're saying it's happening, right?
You can, so on the market right now, probably the best you'll get will be a strain that's maybe 20% cannabidiol and about 0.7% THC, so a ratio of around 20 to 1 cannabidiol to THC. I've heard that it's not terribly popular because most people tend to take the cannabis to feel a bit high and so on, or help with pain and so on. But it is available. You can get oils where there are at least a 1-to-1 ratio. The issue, though, is somewhat the amount of cannabidiol that you need. There's a big study published in the New England Journal of Medicine fairly recently where they use cannabidiol for treating this refractory epilepsy in children. And the dose that they found worked really well was about 20 milligrams per kilogram. So that's for epilepsy, but they think that even for psychosis, they recommend a minimum of 600 to 1,000 milligrams of cannabidiol a day, which, given current products, it would be expensive and difficult to get.
Thanks. Here's another question, and it relates again to THC. And the question is homegrown cannabis low in THC? I'm assuming this person is thinking about growing it, the cannabis on their own. What kind of questions do you need to ask a grower? Is it possible to have homegrown cannabis low in THC?
I could answer that.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, just the principles, right? It's a plant, so we all, you grow plants, and some are better at growing plants than others, right? And the way that you fertilize it, these are the questions I'd ask, what is it that leads to a particular kind? Sure, it's the genetics of the plant, but it's the environment the plant grows up in. It's all sound familiar, right? That makes a difference and so on too. So, theoretically you could do that, but I don't know the skill of anyone, any grower to actually do that. And how would they know? You can't get it tested. You can't just walk into a shop and say, can you test these leaves for me and tell me how much CBD and how much THC there's in there? It's not been legal to do that. But it's very hard to know. It's theoretically possible, maybe, but no, we don't know. It's certainly we do know that some of the growers that know some stuff have used pesticides on it because we've tested for that, and that's not good to be ingesting pesticides with your cannabis. So yeah, but it's very hard to know.
Alistair, you wanted to add something?
No, I was just going to say, that there are some places that can have product tested. The legality is a bit grey, but you're going to cost about $250 to have your sample processed, which is a lot.
Wow, because that was a question that we got from the audience. Where can you buy cannabis tested in house? But you'd have to pay extra for it, and you'd have to know exactly where to go.
The dispensaries will provide a number. If you go to a dispensary, they'll say it's this much THC, it's this much cannabidiol. I wouldn't be too certain that what those numbers are is accurate, but with the licensed producers, again, it's a drug that they are supposed to have tested at legally recognized facilities. So if you do buy from a licensed producer, it's much more likely to be accurate. But even there, I've heard that there can be some discrepancy. The oils tend to be much more consistent in the actual numbers, whereas the plant product is some discrepancy sometimes.
It's the same challenges we've had with herbal medicine in Chinese herbal medicine or other kinds of herbal medicine. Just what is that product? It's very different. than the things that drug companies make for us. It's highly regulated. It's chemistry, and you know what you're getting. You know exactly what you're getting. Any kind of herbal medicines and whatnot, you can't be sure.
So we have a number of questions that are related to other drugs, and it's a long one, but here's a short one.
Can I just make one point to what Bill just said. Last year, the FDA did a review of herbal medicines at the biggest suppliers. So it was Target, Walgreens and GNC. And they looked at their herbal medicines for ginkgo biloba and different ones like this to review how much of what they said was in the product actually was in the product. And they found that most of the products had none. Zero, nothing inside the product that they said. So if you thought you were getting ginkgo biloba, you were getting houseplants. So I make that point only to say that right now we've got a 19-year-old guy at a pot dispensary going, oh yeah, like the balance is 3-to-1. And you know very well they have no idea what they're talking about. We have companies putting out, making trillions of dollars, I'm sure, putting bottles and the whole thing, and pharmacists, what are pharmacists doing? Putting this crap in their pharmacy, and oh, this is for fever for a child. This is ridiculous. So how are we going to expect that we're going to get anything like that from cannabis when we can't get it from even ginkgo biloba? Sorry. Back to you.
The question, again, coming back to schizophrenia, is can a drug-induced schizophrenia be initiated from drinking alcohol?
That is, I think, I can't remember which one of you made this point, but I thought it was a very good one, and I've read the same. Cannabis is the only drug that I know of, a street drug, that has been associated with psychosis. Even things like cocaine, heroin, crystal meth do not have the association that cannabis does, is my understanding, so I'll let you fill in the blanks.
Well, okay, so just, understanding the drug effects and so on. So, taking a drug can, if you take enough of it at once, you get intoxicated, right? Enough alcohol, you get intoxicated, right? Enough coffee, you get really, if you take, drink tons of coffee at one sitting, you will have an effect. So the intoxication state, we most clearly think about LSD, right? LSD, mushrooms, psilocybin, those kind of things. Pretty reliably, first couple of doses you take of that, you will see things, you have visions, you may hear things. Some people think they can fly and they try to with that. So do we call that psychosis? Well, yeah, in a broad definition we call that psychosis, and that's pretty reliable with those hallucinogen kind of drugs, okay? So then the other kind of drugs, the stimulant kind of drugs, methamphetamine, which in the downtown east side is much more associated with psychosis than is cannabis. But methamphetamine and cocaine, these are stimulant drugs. They work on the dopamine system, Alistair was talking about. And in an acute intoxication state, not as reliably, not like everybody, but a certain percentage of people will develop psychotic symptoms with the stimulant kind of drugs and so on. When the acute, go and smoke up a lot of cannabis all at once, my South African colleagues say absolutely. They see in the emergency room people coming in with dagger psychosis, they call it there. They've taken a lot of the stuff and they're really psychotic, and it wears off quite quickly over, after several days or whatnot of treatment and so on. So that's intoxication kind of psychosis or so on. And we understand there are risks with these kind of drugs about an acute psychosis that's an intoxication. Now, does that last? Does that last for 30 years? And it's called schizophrenia then, after that one exposure or so on, or even after repeated exposures or so on, does it last? Not so entirely clear with any of those drugs. If there's an association with all of those drugs, there's probably some increase in risk, but they're multifactorial increases in risk and so on, okay? And then just, thinking about this, tobacco, lung cancer. We're pretty sure that's a causal risk. Tobacco, heart disease. Does tobacco cause a heart attack? Well, yeah, it contributes, but having high blood pressure and having atherosclerosis, that contributed to the heart attack too, right? So we've got to think about schizophrenia, the illness, as having multiple contributors, some of which can be the drug exposures that are going on. There's no question about that. But the cause and the effect and that tightness of the cause and the effect is more difficult to understand for drugs, any particular of these drugs, in terms of thinking that the illness is caused by the drugs. The intoxication state causing psychosis, yeah, we'd all agree on that.
And so this intoxication state, we have another question about young people. Does alcohol have the same negative effect on the brain under 25 as cannabis does?
So the alcohol, the brain damage that happens with alcohol is called Wernicke psychosis or Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. That's when people have become vitamin deficient with the alcoholism and so on, and they can have permanent brain damage. It's fortunately fairly uncommon because people do have good enough diets, even the alcoholics, that they get vitamins and so on. But you can have permanent brain damage related to alcohol with that. Alcohol itself causing a long-lasting psychotic illness or even what we would think of as psychosis, not so much. Alcohol leads to more can lead to more of an agitation, a delirium kind of thing where their consciousness is down and people don't know where they are, they get agitated, they'll fight, they can, during this phase of alcohol withdrawal, they can see things, they can have hallucinatory experiences, but that'll be usually, fortunately, short-lived. But alcohol withdrawal is a very serious and risky thing that people can die from, as I said. So alcohol, is a dangerous drug.
Another question. Are the psychotic symptoms of people with schizophrenia elevated with the use of marijuana, even if they are stable on medication? Or are there any studies being done on the use of marijuana in conjunction with antipsychotics? I think we touched on it earlier, but if someone is of a certain age and is stable on medication, do psychotic symptoms occur with the use of marijuana?
Certainly people who are stable and consuming cannabis are more likely to relapse. They will have greater positive symptoms. But those two, I'm sure there's a fairly big literature on that.
Yeah, the mechanisms are different. So for most of the psychosis and schizophrenia, it is this messenger dopamine, and our drugs are designed to block the effects of that messenger dopamine. We all have dopamine. People with schizophrenia have a little bit too much at times, or it gets pulsed out differently. So the drugs block that effect or bring that effect down. The systems of our brain, because we have what are called endogenous or inside our brain cannabinoids. We all do. So there's receptors that treat those things, those cannabinoids we all have as messengers too, right? But the antipsychotic drugs don't work really on those receptors for the cannabinoid messengers we all have, nor are the antipsychotic drugs designed to block the effects of cannabis. So downstream, they might have some amelioration effect or so on, but my sense is that they're not, in people who have schizophrenia who are taking antipsychotic drugs, it's not like they're protected against the possible increase in psychosis by being exposed to cannabis.
I certainly know clinically in my practice that patients who have abstained for an extended period and then ended up back using cannabis again, it is extremely likely that they're going to relapse as a result of that, just from a clinical experience along with what the literature is showing us.
Even if they're still taking their antipsychotics?
They're using their injectable antipsychotic, things have been going along just fine, and then they start to smoke again and they're psychotic.
Because I have a very long question, very detailed question from someone here. And the question is really about, is it okay to smoke once a year when you have a family get together and on all these other drugs? And I think you've answered that. It sounds like there's a lot of variables in terms of what it is you're smoking and also what you just said. Just want to be
clear. I don't think any of us are going to say it's okay for a person with schizophrenia to smoke cannabis. We just, you can't say that.
Okay, so one whole area we haven't touched on has to do with the kitchen. So medical edibles or marijuana in food. And one question that we've received is, how can one be sure that there is an equal distribution of THC, CBD in each portion? What do we do about people cooking with cannabis?
This is a big problem because when I just heard about this the other day, that brownies, is a normal portion control. But if you read on it, it's actually meant to be 4 different portions. But who eats a quarter of a brownie, right? So the medical society who just came out with that position paper just the other day, this last week, saying there are safer ways to use cannabis than smoking, right? And one of them is eating, but the problem is that often they're getting a lot more cannabis with what they eat. You can vape as well, but we also don't know the risks associated with vaping. So yeah, the problem with edibles, I think, are that there's an increased risk that a pet or a child is going to use whatever it is, and they come in cookies and that sort of thing. But also the ability to distribute it equally in every cookie is very challenging.
I mean, cocaine's an approved drug, right? They still, I think, use cocaine in ear, nose, and throat surgery because of local anesthetic, right? It blocks when the ENT person has to put some tubes up your nose or something like that. But we don't burn it. People who smoke crack are burning the cocaine. And whenever you're burning something, you could again be changing the chemical composition, right? Because you're burning it. And so what happens, it could be quite different. Just because of that mechanism of smoking something, you're burning it, you're ingesting a different kind of things that might be more the cancer-inducing kind of components of things that we smoke than the others. And so, yeah, it forces us, it's kitchen pharmacology, learning about how you absorb drugs, whether it's absorbed in the stomach or further down, and whether you take things at the same time. It's all very complicated, and yeah, that's part of the education process in terms of people who are going to use this kind of stuff. They need to be more informed about pharmacology than they might have been through their education in school or so.
And so this is also part of the reason why people vaporize things, because for some of the compounds like THC and cannabidiol, much of the plant material exists in an inactive form, so you basically have to heat it up to a certain temperature to liberate that THC. You have to drive off carbon dioxide off these molecules. So if you don't achieve a certain temperature, you won't get that THC or that cannabidiol. And the temperature is quite precise. So people could also be eating brownies and then really not getting any effect whatsoever because they haven't heated up enough to liberate that THC from the parent compound.
So yeah, and I have a related question, which is about vaping. And again, if you vape cannabis, I guess what's the effect? Do you have a risk of lung cancer with vaping cannabis as well? And does it have any effect in burning off the negative THC? I guess I don't know.
So there is a big literature on that, but when you use a vaporizer, you're heating it to a lower temperature than you would if you were simply smoking it as a joint. And so the theory is that you're creating less harmful toxins by doing so.
But again, they're plants, right? So tobacco causes lung cancer. Does nicotine cause lung cancer? No, I don't think so. So if you're vaping nicotine, if you're vaping just the active thing, the reason that people smoke cigarettes and they want to get nicotine, so they're whatever. It might not have one effect, but it has the other effect. When you're vaping, are you vaping cannabis or are you vaping THC? Right? Because you've got to think about it. Is it the complex thing that you're doing with this vaping, or is it just one of the active components? So again, it's just part of the challenges with knowing, giving educated answers to these sort of seem like simple questions, but unfortunately they're not.
So here's one that has to do with sort of aging. Doris is asking, I've heard that as people with the illness age, their symptoms lessen. Would that have anything to do with hormone depletion? In other words, do hormones affect your likelihood to have psychotic episodes or schizophrenia?
Well, they can. So, we don't understand a lot about the changes in hormonal environment with age and so on. If anything, we probably understand a little bit more in terms of hormonal environment changes during adolescence, and maybe it's predisposing. One of the reasons why young people are more susceptible to schizophrenia. The idea, too, is that the estrogen, the female hormone, is to some extent protective. As Diane mentioned, women tend to have a later age of onset of schizophrenia and tends to be somewhat less severe. That may be because they have estrogen after the menopause. When the estrogen goes down, they may actually have some little bit worse of the illness itself. But in general, it's right. With as aging happens, the illness tends to have less of these flare-ups and be. There's reason for optimism as we age with that illness or so on. Just exactly how the hormonal environment contributes beyond what I talked about, I don't think we really know.
I think all mental illnesses change with age, and we see that a lot with bipolar disorder, for instance, where people maybe were going up and down all through their life, sometimes getting up into a mania or hypomania, but then I will see people that are in their 50s or 60s or 70s, and they just look depressed all the time. They don't have the ups and downs, but what we do see with aging is them really, I think, more florid cognitive impairment, the negative cognitive outcomes. People will feel, I don't feel anymore, or I don't have my normal ability to feel emotions, or that they feel flat or apathetic all the time. So I think with age, and I think some of that, if you're perimenopausal, you will know your brain changes and how your emotions can change when your estrogen changes. Whether that has to do with what we see as people age with bipolar or schizophrenia, I don't think is entirely clear. But we know that our brain changes as estrogen changes, certainly for women, and for men as testosterone changes.
Okay, so we have another body chemistry question. Is it true that THC levels from pot can be stored in fatty tissues in the brain for months? Does it reside in the state for a long time?
The brain, I'm not sure, but fatty deposits in the body, for sure. Classic examples, people ask, well, I smoke cannabis, how long am I going to show up positive on a drug screen for? And if you just smoked cannabis for the first time, you probably got about 48-hour turnaround. But if you're a chronic, heavy smoker, then stuff will keep leaching out of your fat deposits for up to a month afterwards, and you'll test positive on drug screens. So quite a while, and I don't see why that wouldn't happen in the brain as well.
Okay, interesting. Another question that's sort of related. What are you hearing about the incidence or prevalence of fentanyl in marijuana?
I can give you a clinical experience in that recently I have a 30-year-old woman who is a crack cocaine abuser, and she was clean for some time and then had a relapse and was unable to pay her pusher. So in order to pay him back, she was doing drug delivery for him for a while, and she was telling me that everything that they had fentanyl in it, including cannabis, which I was surprised by because I thought that might be a little bit of an urban myth, but absolutely everything that they had fentanyl in it, and that she had a friend who had died that they associated with cannabis actually next to her. And it wasn't that he was using cocaine with her, that he was using cannabis. So I do not know for certain, but that was my clinical experience recently.
I should let Bill speak to this because he's got some knowledge about this, but I think it's very scary. It's really scary. We're trying to set up facilities at BC Children's Hospital, which is where I work most of the time, to do studies on cannabis, not necessarily related to schizophrenia, but something around epilepsy and cancer. And so we're